I met my husband when we were both students with more dreams than money. And back then, the future seemed simple enough that we rarely questioned it. We studied together in crowded cafes, argued over which instant noodles tasted better after late-night classes, and spent long walks, imagining the apartment we would someday decorate with furniture we couldn't yet afford. He was the kind of person everyone trusted without thinking twice. If a classmate forgot a wallet, he quietly paid the bill. If someone's motorbike wouldn't start, he was already rolling up his sleeves before anyone asked. I remember watching him comfort a friend after a painful breakup, saying almost nothing, but somehow making the silence feel safe. That was the man I believed I was marrying, years later. Looking back now, I don't think that version of him was fake. I think it simply existed alongside another part of him that neither of us fully understood. The first warning came before we were married, during one football season. At first it sounded harmless. He and a few friends made small bets just to make the matches more exciting. When I frowned, he laughed and said it was less than what people spent on coffee every week. Then the amounts quietly grew. One weekend he seemed distracted while we were having lunch. His phone buzzed constantly, and each vibration made him glance at the screen before forcing a smile. A few weeks later, he confessed he had lost far more money than he could repay. The number stunned me. Friends who had once called every weekend suddenly stopped answering his messages. He lost his job soon afterward, and the professional certification he had been working toward was abandoned because he couldn't afford to continue. My parents questioned whether I should stay with him. They never pressured me, but I could hear the worry beneath every careful sentence. I stayed anyway. Partly because I loved him, partly because I remembered how he had supported me through my own difficult months after graduation, when I couldn't find work and had nearly convinced myself I had failed before my adult life had even begun. We slowly rebuilt everything. It wasn't glamorous. We took whatever jobs we could find, counted every expense, and celebrated tiny victories like paying a bill on time or replacing an old appliance without borrowing money. Years passed. We got married. Our daughter was born healthy and curious, always asking questions that made both of us laugh. With help from our families, we moved into a modest house that finally felt like home. My husband found stable work through an acquaintance, and for a while, life settled into a rhythm that almost convinced me the past belonged safely behind us. Then another football season arrived. At first I barely noticed. He watched matches after putting our daughter to bed, sometimes staying awake later than usual. Then I began hearing notification sounds long after midnight. When I asked if everything was okay, he answered too quickly. Just talking to the guys about the games. Something in his voice reminded me of years earlier, but I didn't want to become the suspicious wife who questioned every late-night message. One afternoon, he came home unusually quiet. He barely touched dinner. Our daughter proudly showed him a picture she had drawn, and although he smiled, his eyes never left the table. That night I woke up and found his side of the bed empty. He was sitting alone in the living room, staring at his phone with both hands covering his face. Before I could ask what was wrong, he whispered, "I messed up again." I don't remember sitting down, but somehow I was beside him while he explained everything in broken sentences. The betting had returned months earlier. Losses became bigger bets. Bigger bets became desperate borrowing. Then, in panic, he used money from work, believing he could replace it before anyone noticed. Of course he couldn't. As he kept talking, the amount grew larger than I could process. I remember looking toward our daughter's bedroom door, and thinking that nothing in the room around me looked different, even though our lives had already changed. The weeks that followed became a blur of phone calls, borrowed money, meetings, and endless calculations written across scraps of paper. Every day seemed to reveal another debt I hadn't known existed. There were personal loans, credit accounts, money borrowed from acquaintances, and obligations hidden behind vague explanations. Each time I believed I had finally uncovered everything, another message arrived. I found myself becoming someone I hardly recognized. I learned how to negotiate repayment schedules, compare interest rates, and explain financial disasters without crying in front of strangers. One afternoon, an older woman at a financial counseling office listened patiently while I stumbled through our situation. After reviewing the paperwork, she said something I had never heard before. "People think the biggest danger is the amount of debt," she told me. "Sometimes it's actually the hidden debt. When someone feels ashamed, they often reveal problems gradually instead of all at once, because they hope each confession will be the last." I had assumed every new discovery meant another lie created that week. She explained that psychologists sometimes call this staggered disclosure, a pattern driven less by strategy than by fear. People reveal painful truths in small pieces because they can't emotionally tolerate exposing the entire reality at once. That didn't excuse what had happened, but it changed how I interpreted each new confession. I stopped expecting a single conversation to uncover everything. Instead, I asked him to write down every obligation he could remember without interruption. It took him nearly 2 days. Several times he stared at the page for 10 minutes before adding another lender he had forgotten or avoided mentioning. Watching that list grow was heartbreaking, but strangely, it was also the first moment I felt we were finally looking at the same problem instead of two different versions of it. Daily life continued around the crisis in unsettling ways. Our daughter still wanted bedtime stories. Bills still arrived. Neighbors still waved cheerfully over the fence, unaware that I sometimes stood in the kitchen, calculating whether we could afford groceries after making another payment. Friends occasionally invited us to birthdays or family dinners, and I invented excuses because pretending everything was normal required more energy than I had left. Despite everything, my husband remained gentle with our daughter. He packed her school bag every morning, fixed broken toys, and never raised his voice. Watching him braid her hair before school, while knowing the chaos hidden beneath our finances, created a confusing mixture of affection and resentment that I struggled to explain even to myself. People often imagine harmful behavior coming from cruel people. Real life wasn't that simple. The person who had shattered my sense of security was also the person patiently teaching our daughter how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. That contradiction exhausted me more than the debt itself. Several months later, I quietly drafted divorce papers. I didn't tell anyone. They stayed folded inside a drawer beneath old documents. Some evenings I opened the drawer, looked at them, and wondered whether leaving required more courage than staying, or whether it was the other way around. Every time I imagined signing them, another memory interrupted me. The student who waited outside my examination room with cheap flowers. The young father crying while holding our newborn daughter for the first time. The husband now attending counseling sessions and handing me every receipt without being asked. None of those memories erased the damage. They simply refused to disappear. Recovery moved slowly enough that progress was almost invisible. There were setbacks. 1 month an unexpected expense threatened to derail our repayment plan. Another time, I discovered he had minimized the seriousness of a conversation with a creditor, because he feared upsetting me again. We argued more honestly than we ever had before. For the first time I told him that what hurt most wasn't losing money. It was living inside uncertainty, never knowing whether today's version of the truth would still be true tomorrow. He listened without defending himself. That silence meant more than any apology he had offered during the first frantic weeks. Nearly a year after everything unraveled, I found the unsigned divorce papers while searching for an insurance document. I held them for a long time before placing them back exactly where they had been. I didn't tear them up, and I didn't sign them. I realized they had quietly become something different. They were no longer a decision waiting to happen, but a reminder of how close our family had come to ending. I still don't know what our future will look like. Trust returns much more slowly than money disappears. And some days, I still catch myself wondering whether another football season will arrive, carrying another secret. But I also know that pretending uncertainty doesn't exist has never protected anyone. These days our conversations are less comfortable, but more honest. Our budget sits openly on the kitchen table, instead of hidden inside one person's head. Every payment we finish feels ordinary, rather than triumphant. And maybe that's exactly what rebuilding is supposed to feel like. When I think back to the young woman who believed love alone could solve every crisis, I don't judge her. She simply hadn't yet learned that some promises are tested not by grand moments, but by hundreds of ordinary evenings when trust must be rebuilt, one uncomfortable conversation at a time. And that understanding came to me so gradually, I almost missed the moment when surviving together stopped feeling like the end of our story, and became the difficult, uncertain beginning of whatever comes next.